I was sitting at my desk reviewing quarterly reports for one of my investment properties when my phone lit up with a message. Divorce hearing confirmation. Case 47291, Matthews versus Matthews. My stomach tightened despite having 2 months to prepare for this moment. Richard, my husband of 12 years, had filed for divorce without warning. No discussion, no attempt at counseling, just papers delivered to our home by a courier while he was conveniently away on a business trip with his legal team. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you! Richard was a partner at Caldwell & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. He specialized in divorce cases, ironically enough, and had built his reputation securing favorable outcomes for wealthy clients, typically men looking to protect their assets from their soon-to-be ex-wives. What Richard didn't know, what he had never bothered to learn during our 12 years together, was that before we met, I had quietly built my own empire. While he saw me as nothing more than the supportive wife who organized dinner parties for his colleagues and clients, I was actually a silent investor in numerous businesses across the city. I kept this separate from our marriage, maintaining my maiden name for all business dealings. 3 years into our marriage, an opportunity arose that I couldn't resist. Through a complex network of shell companies and investment groups, I had secretly become the majority owner of the very law firm where Richard worked. I never intended to use this information. I loved Richard despite his workaholic tendencies and emotional distance. I thought we had a good life together, and I was content to keep my business dealings separate. But then came Ashley, his 26-year-old paralegal. I discovered their affair 8 months ago when I stopped by his office unexpectedly with lunch. The way they looked at each other, the subtle touches. I'd been married to him long enough to recognize what was happening. I said nothing, deciding to watch and wait. Within weeks, he was working late more frequently, taking weekend conferences, and growing increasingly distant. I hired a private investigator who confirmed my suspicions with photographs of them, together at a resort 3 hours away. Still, I waited, giving Richard the opportunity to come clean, to talk to me, to try to work through whatever was happening. Instead, I received divorce papers on a Tuesday morning while he was in Chicago with Ashley. The papers were brutal, claiming irreconcilable differences, while simultaneously accusing me of emotional abandonment of the marriage. He was seeking an uneven split of our assets, claiming his career and connections had been the primary source of our wealth. I called Diane, my best friend since college, and the only person who knew the full extent of my business holdings. "He's trying to screw you over," she said bluntly after I explained the situation. "I know," I replied, a strange calm settling over me. "But he has no idea who he's up against." "Are you going to tell him about the firm?" Diane asked. "Not yet," I said, formulating my plan. "I think I'll wait for the perfect moment." I hired my own attorney, not from Richard's firm, obviously, and proceeded to respond to the divorce petition as any wronged wife would. I appeared appropriately upset in our preliminary hearings, dressed modestly, and spoke softly. Richard seemed almost disappointed that I wasn't falling apart, but he maintained his professional demeanor, only occasionally whispering to his attorney. For 2 months, we proceeded through the standard divorce process: discovery, financial disclosures, negotiations. I was careful to only disclose what was legally required. My personal accounts, our joint holdings, the house, my business interests hidden behind layers of corporations never came up. Then came the email confirming our court date, the official hearing where everything would be decided. I scrolled further, down the message, and my heart skipped a beat when I read the final line. All parties must be present at the hearing. No exceptions or representatives permitted. A slow smile spread across my face. Richard wouldn't be able to hide behind his legal team. He would have to face me directly. And if my sources were correct, He was planning to bring Ashley to the courthouse, not into the actual hearing, but to wait outside. A show of solidarity and perhaps a glimpse of his future. Little did he know, I had been preparing for this day since those divorce papers arrived, and I had a surprise of my own waiting. For him. The morning of the hearing arrived with unusual clarity. I woke before my alarm, strangely serene despite the stakes. I chose my outfit with surgical precision, a tailored navy suit that projected confidence without appearing showy. Pearl earrings Richard had given me for our 5th anniversary, and my grandmother's vintage Cartier watch. A reminder that I came from a line of strong women who had faced their own battles. My attorney, Meredith Sloan, met me at a coffee shop across from the courthouse. She was brilliant, sharp, and completely unintimidated by Richard's reputation. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, sliding into the booth opposite me. "More than ready," I replied, taking a sip of my espresso. "Is everything in place?" She nodded, patting her leather portfolio. "All the documents are here. The ownership records, financial statements, transfer authorizations, everything." The moment he tries to claim his career was the backbone of our financial stability. "We dropped the bomb," Meredith finished, a glint in her eye. "It's going to be quite the spectacle." As we crossed the street to the courthouse, I spotted them immediately. Richard and Ashley arriving together in his sleek black Audi. She stepped out first, all long legs and bouncy blonde hair, wearing a dress that belonged more at a cocktail party than a courthouse. Richard followed, adjusting his tie with that self-satisfied expression I'd grown to detest. I ducked behind a column, not wanting to be seen yet. "That's them?" Meredith whispered, peering around me. "Yes," I confirmed, watching as Richard placed his hand on the small of Ashley's back. "She's 26, a paralegal at the firm, started working for him about a year ago." "Classic," Meredith muttered, preparing. "And narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. We waited until they entered the building before following. Inside, Richard and Ashley stood near the directory, his head bent close to hers as he said something that made her laugh. Then he noticed me, his expression shifting. Instantly, smile vanishing, posture stiffening, I maintained eye contact, keeping my face neutral as I approached. "Richard, Elizabeth," he replied with a slight nod. His eyes flickered to Meredith. "I see you've brought counsel." "Just as you have," I said, noting he was accompanied by Marcus Weber, the senior partner at Caldwell and Associates, rather than his usual attorney. "Interesting choice." "This is Ashley," Richard said, gesturing to the young woman beside him. "She's here for support." I raised an eyebrow. "How thoughtful of you to bring your girlfriend to our divorce hearing." Ashley flushed, clearly uncomfortable. Richard's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Marcus stepped forward. "Mrs. Matthews, perhaps we could speak privately before the hearing begins," he suggested smoothly. "I believe there's still an opportunity to resolve this matter amicably." "I'm sure there is," I replied, meeting his gaze. "But I think we'll let the judge hear what we both have to say first." Marcus's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "As you wish." As we moved toward the courtroom, Richard whispered something to Ashley, who nodded and took a seat on a bench outside, the loyal girlfriend, ready to comfort him afterward. The thought almost made me laugh. Inside courtroom C, Judge Eleanor Harwood, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and penetrating eyes, wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. "I understand there are disputes regarding the division of assets," she said, reviewing our files. "Mr. Matthews claims that his career has been the primary source of the couple's wealth and is seeking 70% of the joint assets. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus responded, standing. "Mr. Matthews has been a partner at Caldwell and Associates for the past 8 years. His income and connections have been the foundation of their financial standing." Judge Harwood looked at me. And Mrs. Matthews, you dispute this characterization? This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. I nodded to Meredith, who stood with document in hand. Yes, Your Honor, Meredith said confidently. We not only dispute it, but we have evidence that will significantly alter the court's understanding of this case. Richard shifted in his seat, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face for the first time. Your Honor, Meredith began, we would like to submit evidence regarding Mrs. Matthews's financial holdings, which have been independently maintained throughout the marriage. Judge Harwood nodded, and the bailiff collected the documents from Meredith to distribute to the judge and opposing counsel. I watched Richard's face carefully as Marcus received the paperwork. At first, he appeared merely curious, then confused as he began scanning the pages. As you can see, Meredith continued, Mrs. Matthews has maintained substantial business interests under her maiden name, Elizabeth Winters, throughout the duration of the marriage. These interests include multiple real estate holdings, investment, portfolios, and most notably, majority ownership of Winters Holdings LLC, which acquired controlling interest in Caldwell and Associates law firm 9 years ago. The courtroom fell silent. Marcus froze, his finger hovering over the page he'd been reading. Slowly, he turned to look at Richard, whose expression had transformed from confusion to disbelief. That's impossible, Richard said, his voice cracking, slightly. He looked at me, then back at the documents. This must be some kind of mistake. There's no mistake, Mr. Matthews, Meredith replied calmly. The documentation is quite clear. Through a series of investment vehicles and holding companies, Mrs. Matthews has owned 62% of Caldwell and Associates for the past 9 years. She has been, essentially, your employer throughout your partnership at the firm. Richard's face drained of color. Elizabeth, he said, looking at me directly for what felt like the first time in years. His voice was barely above a whisper. Is this true? I met his gaze steadily. Yes, Richard. It's true. Judge Harwood cleared her throat, clearly recognizing the significance of this revelation. Mr. Weber, were you aware of this arrangement? Marcus, who had been flipping frantically through the documents, looked up with a carefully composed expression. No, Your Honor. This information was not disclosed to the partnership. It was disclosed to the board of directors of the parent company, Meredith countered smoothly. As legally required, the structure of ownership was never hidden. It simply wasn't advertised to the daily operations team. Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This changes everything, he said, turning to Marcus. We need to regroup. Sit down, Mr. Matthews, Judge Harwood ordered firmly. We're in the middle of proceedings. Richard reluctantly returned to his seat, but I could see the panic setting in. Everything he thought he knew, about me, about his position, about this, divorce, had just been upended. Your Honor, Meredith continued, in light of this information, we believe Mr. Matthews's claim that his career was the primary contributor to the couple's wealth is demonstrably false. In fact, Mrs. Matthews's business acumen and investments have far outpaced his earnings during their marriage. Judge Harwood studied the documents carefully. These are significant revelations, Mrs. Matthews. Why weren't these assets disclosed in the initial financial declarations? They were disclosed in my personal financial statement, Your Honor, I replied. The business holdings are listed under separate documentation as required by law. My counsel can provide the complete filing, trail if needed. The judge nodded, then looked at Richard and Marcus. Counsel, do you need time to review these documents and adjust your position? Marcus cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. Given this new information, we would request a brief recess to confer with our client. Granted, Judge Harwood said. We'll take 30 minutes. When we reconvene, I expect both parties to be prepared to discuss a more realistic division of assets. As the judge exited the courtroom, Richard remained frozen in his seat, staring at the documents in front of him. Marcus leaned over, speaking urgently in his ear, but Richard seemed unable to process what was happening. I stood and smoothed my skirt, feeling unexpectedly calm. This moment, watching the realization dawn on him that I wasn't who he thought I was both vindicating and sad. 12 years of marriage, and he had never really known me. As Meredith and I prepared to leave for the recess, Richard finally snapped out of his daze and approached me. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice low and intense. "All these years, would it have mattered?" I asked quietly. "Would you have treated me differently if you'd known I wasn't just your wife but also your boss?" "Of course it would have mattered." His face flushed. This is humiliating. "To discover your wife isn't just the supportive background character you assumed she was," I supplied. "That's not fair, Elizabeth. Neither was bringing your girlfriend to our divorce hearing, Richard," I replied coolly. "Or trying to take 70% of our assets based on your inflated sense of importance." Marcus appeared at Richard's side, placing a warning hand on his arm. "Richard, not here," he muttered, his knuckles white with tension. I stepped closer to Richard, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "By the way, Ashley is still waiting outside. Someone should probably tell her that her boyfriend just discovered he's been sleeping with the boss's wife." The color drained from Richard's face again. Without another word, he turned and strode out of the courtroom, Marcus hurrying after him, like a yacht's dinghy caught in a wake. Meredith raised an eyebrow as she watched them go. "That went about as expected." "Yes," I agreed, "but we're not done yet." As we stepped into the hallway, I saw Richard speaking intensely with Ashley, whose expression cycled rapidly from confusion to shock to embarrassment. She glanced up, caught me watching, and quickly looked away. A deer recognizing the hunter. "What happens now?" Meredith asked as we moved toward a private consultation room. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 12 years lifting from my shoulders. "Now we negotiate, but this time we do it on my terms." Through the small window in our consultation room door, I could see Richard and Ashley having what appeared to be an intense conversation. She was gesturing wildly, her face flushed with emotion, while Richard kept glancing nervously back toward the courtroom. "He's in full damage control mode," Meredith observed, following my gaze. "Both professionally and personally." I nodded, turning away. Marcus is probably explaining to him right now what this means for his career. Dating the boss's wife isn't exactly a pathway to making senior partner. "Speaking of which," Meredith said, taking a seat at the small table, "we need to discuss your next move regarding the firm. Your ownership gives you significant leverage, not just in the divorce proceedings, but in Richard's professional future." I sat across from her, considering my options. In the heat of planning my courtroom revelation, I hadn't fully thought through the aftermath. "I never intended to interfere with the firm's operations," I admitted. "My investment was purely financial. The partners run the day-to-day business, and they've done well. Profits have increased every year. And yet, you now have a personal conflict with one of those partners," Meredith pointed out. "A partner who was presumably unaware his wife was essentially his employer throughout his career." I smiled wryly. Richard always said I wasn't interested enough in his work. If only he'd known. A knock on the door interrupted us. Marcus stood there alone, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, collar askew, the hint of a sweat stain darkening. His silk tie, "May I speak with you, Elizabeth?" he asked, his voice carefully measured. "Privately?" I glanced at Meredith, who nodded slightly. "I'll be right outside," she said, gathering her notes and slipping past Marcus into the hallway. Once the door closed, Marcus sank into the chair Meredith had vacated, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. The lines around his mouth deepened as he exhaled slowly. "In all my decades practicing law, he began. "I have never been blindsided like this." "I imagine not," I replied calmly. Though, to be fair, the information was available to the board. It's not my fault no one connected Elizabeth Winters with Elizabeth Matthews. He looked at me, a mixture of annoyance and reluctant respect in his eyes. Why keep it secret from Richard all these years? What was the point? I considered the question carefully. It wasn't the first time I'd asked myself the same thing. When I first made the investment, Richard and I had only been married for 3 years. He was an associate with ambitions, and I didn't want my financial position to overshadow his career. I thought it would hurt him, make him feel inadequate. I paused, memories of our early years washing over me. As time passed, it just became easier to keep that separation. Richard was building his reputation, and I didn't want anyone thinking he'd advanced because of my influence. "And now?" Marcus asked, leaning forward. "What do you intend to do with your controlling interest now that this is all in the open?" "That depends largely on Richard," I replied honestly. "And on you, Marcus." His eyebrows rose. "Me?" "You're the managing partner. You set the tone for the firm. How you handle this situation, and Richard, will influence my decisions moving forward." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the implications. "Richard is understandably distressed. He's requesting a settlement conference rather than continuing the hearing today." "Is he now?" I couldn't help the slight smile that tugged at my lips. "And what terms is he proposing?" "A 50-50 split of all marital assets," Marcus said. "And he's dropping all claims to your business holdings." "How generous of him to offer me half of what's already mine," I remarked dryly. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "Elizabeth, Richard made a mistake. Several mistakes, actually. But he's been a valuable asset to the firm. Whatever personal issues exist between you two, I'm asking you to consider the broader implications before you make any decisions." I studied Marcus's face. He wasn't just worried about Richard, but about himself. About all the partners who had no idea their fates had been in my hands for nearly a decade. "I have no intention of dismantling the firm, Marcus," I assured him. "As I said, my investment was always meant to be passive. The fact that Richard and I are divorcing doesn't change that." Relief flickered across his features, but I held up a hand before he could respond. "However," I continued, my voice hardening slightly, "I do expect the firm to handle this divorce ethically. No hidden assets, no legal games, no attempts to draw this out unnecessarily. A clean, fair split based on full financial disclosure from both sides." Marcus nodded quickly. "Of course, absolutely. And one more thing," I added. "Richard's relationship with Ashley is a potential liability for the firm. I trust you'll address that appropriately." Understanding passed between us. Marcus stood, straightening his tie. "I'll speak with Richard about the settlement proposal. We still have a few minutes before the recess ends." As he reached for the Dodger, I called after him. "Oh, and Marcus, when you're done, please send Ashley in. I'd like a word with her as well." Ashley entered the consultation room like a student called to the principal's office, hesitant, nervous, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Her eyes darted around, avoiding direct contact with mine. Even her bouncy blonde curls seemed to have lost some of their spring. "Mrs. Matthews," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus said you wanted to see me. Please, sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "And call me Elizabeth. After all, you've been sleeping with my husband for at least 8 months. I think we're past formalities." She flinched, finally meeting my gaze, her fingers fidgeting with the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. New, expensive, and undoubtedly a gift from Richard. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I assured her, keeping my tone neutral. "I didn't ask to speak with you for an apology. I wanted to clarify a few things, for your sake as much as mine. Ashley sat down slowly, perching on the edge of the chair as if ready to flee. Up close, I could see she was younger than I'd initially thought, perhaps closer to 24 than 26. Her makeup had been carefully applied to create a natural look that probably took 40 minutes to achieve. She was beautiful in that fresh, unlined way that made women my age simultaneously envious and pitying. First, I began, I want to make it clear that I don't blame you for the end of my marriage. Richard and I had problems long before you came into the picture. Relief flooded her features, quickly followed by suspicion. She'd clearly been expecting recriminations, not absolution. Why are you telling me this? She asked, her voice stronger now. Because I don't want you operating under any illusions about your situation, I replied calmly. Richard didn't leave me for you because of some grand passion or once-in-a-lifetime connection. He left because our marriage had become inconvenient, and you were convenient. Her cheeks flushed. You don't know anything about our relationship. I know Richard, I countered. I've known him for 14 years, married to him for 12, and I know his pattern. When things get difficult or boring, he finds something, or someone, new and exciting to distract him. I leaned forward slightly. Did he tell you I was cold, distant? That I didn't understand his ambition or support his career? The flicker in her eyes told me I'd hit the mark. That's what he told his girlfriend before me, I continued. The one he was seeing when we met. He was engaged to her, actually. Did he mention that? Ashley's eyes widened slightly. He said his previous engagement ended mutually. I couldn't help but laugh. Is that what he called it? I suppose finding your fiancé in bed with another woman could be considered a mutual decision to end things. Ashley swallowed hard. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know who you're really with, I said simply. And because your position at the firm is now complicated. Because you own it, she stated, a hint of defiance returning to her voice. Yes, though that's not the main issue. Office relationships happen, but you're a paralegal who's been sleeping with a partner, a married partner who directly supervises your work. That creates liability issues for the firm. Fear flashed across her face. Are you firing me? I don't manage hiring and firing, I clarified, but the partners will need to address the situation, especially now that it's out in the open. At minimum, you'll need to be transferred to a different department, away from Richard's supervision. Ashley's posture stiffened. Richard promised we'd continue working together. He said we make a great team. I'm sure he did, I replied, unsurprised. Richard makes a lot of promises when they serve his immediate needs. Whether he keeps them is another matter entirely. I could see the doubt creeping into her expression, the first cracks in her certainty about the man she thought she knew. There's something else you should consider, I continued, watching Ashley's perfectly manicured fingers tighten around her purse strap. Richard built his reputation on high-profile divorce cases, securing favorable outcomes for wealthy men against their wives. Now he's on the receiving end of a divorce where his wife holds significant power over his career. The irony won't be lost on his colleagues or clients. Ashley bit her lip, her teeth leaving tiny indentations in her coral lipstick. You're saying his reputation will be damaged. I'm saying his entire professional identity is built around being the smartest person in the room, the one who's always 3 steps ahead. I gestured toward the courtroom. Today, that identity took a major hit. How he responds to that will tell you everything you need to know about his character. Why do you care what happens to me? She asked suddenly, the scent of her expensive perfume. Clive Christian, if I wasn't mistaken. Another gift from Richard, hanging in the air between us. You should hate me. I sighed, feeling suddenly tired. The weight of performance, maintaining my composed facade through this entire ordeal, was beginning to take its toll. Hate requires energy I'd rather direct elsewhere, and despite what you might think, I don't want to destroy Richard. I just want him to face the consequences of his choices, professionally and personally." For a long moment, Ashley said nothing, her eyes fixed on her hands folded in her lap. When she finally looked up, there was a new awareness in her expression, the first glimmers of clarity breaking through infatuation's fog. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "About the firm, about his previous engagement, about any of it. He made it sound like you were this cold, career-obsessed woman who neglected him." I smiled wryly. The irony being that he never actually knew what my career was. A soft knock on the door interrupted us. The bailiff informed us that court would reconvene in 5 minutes. As Ashley stood to leave, she hesitated. "What should I do now?" "That's not for me to decide," I replied honestly. "But if I were you, I'd pay very close attention to how Richard treats you today, now that the power dynamic has shifted. People reveal their true character in moments of crisis." As the door closed behind her, I took a deep breath, preparing myself for what was to come. The hardest part wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally in control of my own story. The atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed dramatically when we reconvened. Richard sat stiffly at his table, his earlier confidence replaced by a tightly controlled tension evident in the muscle twitching along his jawline. Marcus sat beside him, papers neatly arranged, his professional demeanor firmly back in place. I noticed Ashley was nowhere to be seen. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Harwood re-entered. After we were seated, the judge looked between our two tables, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "I understand the parties have had an opportunity to discuss new information. Where do we stand?" Marcus stood. "Your Honor, in light of the financial disclosures provided by Mrs. Matthews, we would like to propose a settlement agreement rather than proceeding with the contested hearing." Judge Harwood raised an eyebrow. "That's a significant change in position, Counselor." "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus acknowledged, the faintest sheen of sweat visible on his forehead despite the courtroom's aggressive air conditioning. "After reviewing Mrs. Matthews's documentation, we recognize that Mr. Matthews's initial position regarding asset division was misguided." Richard's jaw clenched visibly at the characterization, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. "I see," the judge said, turning to our side. "Ms. Sloan, what is your client's position on settlement discussions?" Meredith rose. "Mrs. Matthews is open to reasonable settlement terms, Your Honor, provided they acknowledge the full extent of her separate property and fairly divide the actual marital assets." Judge Harwood nodded. "Very well. Would the parties prefer to continue settlement discussions privately, or would you like the court to remain involved at this stage?" Marcus and Meredith exchanged glances. "Given the complexity of the assets involved," Meredith responded, "we believe the court's continued oversight would be beneficial, at least until preliminary terms are established." "I agree," Marcus added quickly, surprising me. I suspected he wanted the judge present as a buffer against any further revelations I might have planned. "Proceed then," Judge Harwood directed. "Mr. Weber, please outline your client's proposed terms." Marcus cleared his throat. "Mr. Matthews is prepared to acknowledge that Mrs. Matthews's business holdings, including her ownership interest in Caldwell and Associates, constitute separate property not subject to division in the divorce. Further, he is willing to accept an equal division of the marital assets accumulated during their 12-year marriage." Judge Harwood looked at Richard, who nodded stiffly, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. "Additionally," Marcus continued, "Mr. Matthews withdraws his previous claims regarding his career being the primary source of the couple's wealth and acknowledges Mrs. Matthews's significant financial contributions to the marriage." The judge made notes, then turned to our table. "Mrs. Sloan, your response?" Meredith stood. Mrs. Matthews accepts the acknowledgement of her separate property and the equal division of marital assets. However, there are several specific items we wish to address. Meredith proceeded to outline our position on the house. I wanted to sell it and split the proceeds. Richard's retirement accounts, subject to division as marital property, and various personal items with sentimental value. Throughout this exchange, Richard remained silent, his earlier bluster completely evaporated. Occasionally, his eyes would flick toward me, a mixture of anger and something else, perhaps regret, visible in his expression before he quickly looked away. As Meredith concluded our position, Judge Harwood nodded. These terms seem reasonable and fairly aligned. I believe we can reach a settlement agreement today. She turned to Richard. Mr. Matthews, you've been uncharacteristically quiet. Do you have anything to add before we proceed with formalizing these terms? For a moment, I thought Richard might maintain his silence. Then slowly he stood, straightening his shoulders like a man preparing to face a firing squad. Your Honor, he began, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his posture. I accept the terms as outlined. I would, however, like to address one additional matter. Judge Harwood nodded. Go ahead. Richard turned slightly, finally meeting my gaze directly. The courtroom lights cast harsh shadows across his face, accentuating the lines that hadn't been there when we'd met. I would like to formally apologize to Mrs. Matthews for my conduct during the latter part of our marriage and for the adversarial approach I initially took to these proceedings. I blinked, genuinely surprised. This was not what I had expected. My behavior was unprofessional and disrespectful, he continued. Elizabeth deserved better, both as my wife and as a... The slight hesitation before his next words spoke volumes about how difficult they were for him to utter. Business associate. While I understand this apology doesn't change the outcome of our divorce, Richard added, I want the record to reflect my recognition of my own misconduct. Judge Harwood nodded, seemingly impressed by this unexpected display of accountability. Thank you, Mr. Matthews. Your apology is noted. She turned to me. Mrs. Matthews, would you like to respond? All eyes in the courtroom turned to me. I stood, slowly, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. Richard's apology had caught me off guard, not because I didn't think him capable of apologizing, but because it seemed genuinely unscripted. Marcus looked as surprised as I felt. I appreciate the apology, Your Honor, I said finally, and I accept it in the spirit in which it was offered. I paused, considering my next words carefully. What I said now would set the tone for whatever relationship, professional or otherwise, Richard and I might have moving forward. I would also like to clarify that my ownership stake in Caldwell and Associates was never intended to interfere with its operations or the careers of its partners, including Richard. That separation was important to me, and it remains so. The firm has been well managed under its current leadership, and I have no desire to change that arrangement. Relief visibly washed over Marcus's face. Richard's expression remained carefully neutral, but I could see the slight relaxation in his shoulders. With that understanding, I continued, I believe we can proceed amicably with finalizing our divorce and maintain appropriate professional boundaries thereafter. Judge Harwood nodded approvingly. Well said, Mrs. Matthews. She looked between us. It seems we have the foundation for a settlement agreement. I'm going to direct both parties to work with my clerk to draft the formal documentation while I attend to another matter. We'll reconvene in 1 hour to review and finalize the agreement. She stood. Court is in recess. As the judge exited, Richard approached our table, leaving Marcus behind. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hands clasped in front of him. Elizabeth, he said quietly. Could we speak privately for a moment? I glanced at Meredith, who nodded slightly. 5 minutes, I agreed, rising from my seat. No more. Richard and I found a quiet corner in the courthouse hallway, away from the flow of people. He looked different somehow. The polished, confident attorney replaced by someone more hesitant, more human. "Where's Ashley?" I asked, noticing she was no longer waiting on the bench outside the courtroom. A flash of discomfort crossed his face. "She left. We decided it would be best." I raised an eyebrow but didn't press for details. Whatever had transpired between them during our recess was their business now. "Your apology in there," I said instead. "Was that Marcus's idea?" "Richard's?" Lips tightened slightly. "No, believe it or not, I'm capable of recognizing when I've been an ass." 12 years of marriage suggests otherwise, I replied, but there was no real heat in my words. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a rare gesture of frustration he typically avoided in professional settings. "I deserve that. I deserve." For a moment we stood in silence, the weight of our shared history suspended between us. 12 years of marriage, vacations in Santorini and Paris, the miscarriage in our 4th year that we never really talked about afterward, the gradual drift into separate lives under the same roof. How had we gone from finishing each other's sentences to becoming strangers? "Why didn't you tell me?" Richard finally asked, his voice quieter now. "About the firm, about your other businesses. All of it." It was the question I'd been expecting since the moment my ownership was revealed. I'd prepared answers, rehearsed explanations. But standing here now, I found myself searching for the truth beneath the practiced responses. "At first, it was because I didn't want to overshadow you," I admitted, watching an elderly couple shuffle past us hand in hand, a glimpse of what we might have become in another life. "You were so proud of making associate, so driven to become partner. I thought if you knew your wife essentially owned the firm, it would diminish your accomplishments somehow." Richard's expression softened slightly. "And later?" "Later, it just became the status quo. The longer I waited to tell you, the harder it became to bring it up." I paused, meeting his gaze directly. "And honestly, after a while, I started to wonder if you'd even care." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Richard, when was the last time you asked me about my day? About my interests? About anything in my life that didn't directly impact yours?" I shook my head. "You stopped seeing me years ago. I became background noise in your life. The wife who managed the house, hosted your business dinners, and never complained about your late nights at the office." He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "I didn't know how to tell you that the quiet, supportive wife you took for granted was actually a successful businesswoman in her own right," I continued, not without it sounding like an accusation. Richard leaned against the wall, the courthouse's marble cool against his back, looking suddenly tired. The perfect Windsor knot of his tie now slightly askew. "I really believed you were happy with our arrangement," he said, "that you preferred being taken care of." "That's because it was easier for you to believe that than to actually ask me what I wanted," I pointed out. "Just like it was easier to start something with Ashley than to address the problems in our marriage." He winced at the mention of her name. "That was a mistake." "The affair or bringing her to our divorce hearing?" I asked dryly. "Both," he admitted, though the latter was particularly stupid. I was trying to make a point, I think. Show you I'd moved on, that I didn't need you anymore. How's that working out for you? I couldn't resist asking. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "About as well as you'd expect, given the circumstances." He straightened, his expression turning serious again. "For what it's worth, Elizabeth, I am sorry. Not just about Ashley, but about all of it. Taking you for granted, not seeing who you really were." The apology caught me off guard. In all our years together, Richard had rarely admitted fault so directly. Part of me wanted to savor this moment. The great Richard. Matthew's humbled and contrite, but another part recognized it for what it was, the beginning of closure. "I appreciate that," I said simply. He hesitated, then asked, "What happens now? With the firm, I mean, my position there." And there it was. The question that had likely been foremost in his mind since the revelation in the courtroom. For all his apparent contrition, Richard was still Richard. His career would always be his primary concern. "That depends on you," I replied honestly. "My ownership stake in Caldwell and Associates has always been an investment, not an operational role. I have no interest in interfering with the day-to-day management of the firm." Relief visibly washed over him. "So, my position is secure?" "Your position depends on your value to the firm," I clarified, "which is substantial, from what I understand. Marcus thinks highly of your legal abilities, if not your personal judgment." Richard nodded slowly. "And what about us? After today?" I considered this carefully. What did I want our relationship to be once the divorce was finalized? "Professionally, we maintain appropriate boundaries," I said finally. "You continue your work at the firm, I continue my role as a passive investor. We interact only when absolutely necessary. And personally?" "Personally, Richard, we're done," I said, my voice gentle but firm. Not because of Ashley, but because we stopped being partners years ago. We stopped seeing each other, really seeing each other. And no amount of apologies or revelations can change that. He nodded, accepting this truth with surprising grace. "For what it's worth, I did love you, Elizabeth, in my way." "I know," I replied. "I loved you too. But love isn't enough without respect and understanding." A courthouse clerk approached, informing us that Meredith and Marcus were waiting to begin drafting the settlement agreement. As we turned to walk back, Richard asked one last question. "Did you plan this all along? To reveal your ownership during the divorce proceedings?" I smiled slightly. "No. Initially, I planned to let you have your divorce on your terms. Keep things simple and walk away." "What changed?" "You made it personal," I replied. "The accusations in your filing, bringing Ashley to the courthouse, trying to claim 70% of our assets based on your supposed superior contribution." I shrugged. "You forced my hand." Richard shook his head, a rueful expression crossing his face. "I should have known better than to underestimate you." "Yes," I agreed as we reached the courtroom doors. "You should have." For the first time that day, Richard laughed, a short, genuine sound of self-deprecation. "Well played, Elizabeth. Well played." 1 year later, I stood in my office at Winter's Investment Group reviewing the final proofs for our annual report. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city, including, if I looked at just the right angle, the building housing Caldwell and Associates. So much had changed in 12 months. After years of operating behind layers of holding companies and investment vehicles, I had consolidated my business interests under a single transparent corporate structure. Winter's Investment Group now publicly managed my portfolio, including my continued majority stake in Caldwell and Associates. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, now the managing partner at Caldwell and Associates after Marcus's retirement. 3 months ago. "Quarterly numbers look excellent. Partnership vote approved the expansion proposal unanimously. Dinner next week to celebrate?" I smiled, texting back my agreement. Patricia's elevation to managing partner had been my only significant influence on the firm's operations in the past year. When Marcus announced his retirement, I had quietly suggested to the board that they consider Patricia, not because she was a woman, but because she was unquestionably the most strategic thinker among the partners. The board had agreed, and the firm was thriving under her leadership. My assistant knocked on the doorframe. "Ms. Winters, this arrived for you." She handed me a thick cream envelope with elegant calligraphy on the front. I recognized the style immediately. Richard's favorite stationery shop had a distinctive way of addressing envelopes. Opening it, I found a formal invitation to the opening of Brenner, Walsh & Matthews's new office space, along with a handwritten note Elizabeth, I hope this finds you well. Our firm's expansion represents a significant milestone, and despite our history, I would consider it an honor if you would attend the opening reception. Professional courtesy aside, I believe it would demonstrate to our colleagues that successful people can navigate complex personal histories with grace. Respectfully, Richard P.S. You'll be pleased to know I've taken your inadvertent lesson about due diligence to heart. I've acquired a minority partnership stake in Brenner & Walsh, rather than simply accepting a salaried position. Never again will I be unaware of who truly owns my firm. I smiled at the postscript, so characteristic of Richard, acknowledging the lesson while simultaneously demonstrating he'd evolved beyond it. His move to Brenner & Walsh had indeed been the clean break he'd anticipated. In the past year, he'd rebuilt his practice, re-established his reputation, and apparently secured an ownership position in his new professional home. I placed the invitation on my desk, making a mental note to send a polite acceptance. Richard's gesture, while partly political, also represented something important. Acknowledgement that our shared history, complex as it was, needn't define our futures. As I gathered my belongings to leave for the day, I caught my reflection in the window, confident posture, direct gaze, no hint of the carefully constructed, supportive wife I'd portrayed for so many years. Just Elizabeth Winters, exactly as she was, without pretense or compartmentalization. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.